This documentary is brought to you in part by Gorb's Expert Wall Builders.
Do you feel threatened by your neighbors? Then you need to hire Gorb's Expert Wall Builders. We are currently unemployed and are looking for some work. We will work hard and get the job done as efficiently as possible. Call Gorb's Wall Builders today.
Now enjoy the film. The Berlin Wall, a Seth Gomel film featuring Eileen Vortia, Mark Larson, and Dirk Tecson. On August 14th of 1961, people would wake up and begin their daily routine as usual, only to find a wall of barbed wire and concrete posts standing in front of them. Towering about 12 feet high and stretching 91 miles all around the West by its final phase, the Berlin Wall would leave families separated, hearts broken, and jobs lost for the next 28 years. After the conclusion of World War II, Germany was left in shambles. It was decided that Germany would be split up into 4 different sectors to influence and reconstruct. The 4 nations were France, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. The western part of Germany was controlled by France, Britain, and the US, while the Soviets controlled the east. They also split up the capital city of Berlin. In the city of Berlin, the citizens of the east were migrating over to the west to escape the poverty, oppression, and the superior control from the Eastern Communist government. This resulted in the economy of the East Berlin and population to decline rapidly. East Berlin recognized the problem and decided they needed a permanent solution to end the migration. They went to the center of the Russian government and got the plans to build a wall around West Berlin.
The problem with East Berlin and West Berlin were the economic differences, really. West Berlin was the type of capitalism that we see today, while East Berlin was rooted in a communist-controlled economy. West Berlin was experiencing some sort of economic miracle at the time because capitalism was experiencing a rapid growth and success. And East Berlin was essentially almost the opposite. The people in the East didn't really like how the West was basically gaining all of its success and money, while the East was essentially almost swimming in poverty. So what did they do? Well, they packed up their things and they moved to West Berlin. There wasn't really any reason to stay in the East, so they just left. So between 1949 and 1961, about 2.7 million people left East Berlin and crossed the border to West Berlin. And this became quite a problem for the East Berlin government because they were losing all their people.
During the night of August 12, 1961, the government of East Germany started to seal off all points of entry into West Berlin with barbed wire and posts. Within the following weeks, construction was started on a large concrete wall, and it was filled with minefields and watchtowers. West Berlin sought out help from U.S. troops and were disappointed when John F. Kennedy gave up on the idea of breaking the wall. Kennedy is quoted with saying, "A wall is a hell of a lot better than a war." In the years to come, the Berlin Wall became the symbol of the Cold War. It showed the great divide of the communist East Berlin and the democratic West Berlin. The Soviets characterized the wall as a necessary means of protection against the immoral influences of capitalism and Western culture. The wall was called the Anti-Fascischer Schutzwall by the German Democratic Republic, also referred to as the GDR, which was East Germany. This was a term of propaganda, which means protective wall, and it has a defensive connotation, and was therefore considered a euphemism. The reason behind the Anti-Fascischer Schutzwall was to, quote, keep Western fascists from lessening the power of the socialist state. At least 170 people died trying to get through the wall, but 5,000 still managed to escape to West Berlin. As more and more people started to escape, the East government got frightened, and the guards were instructed to shoot anyone in the death zone, or the strip of land in the middle of the wall. The death zone consisted of many different levels of trenches, obstacles, barbed wire, and various materials that would prevent someone from driving a vehicle through the wall. Aside from these protective measures, East Germany militarized the entire border by deploying thousands of guards, millions of landmines, and over 3,000 attack dogs.
I remember looking out my window and seeing the boundless wall span the entirety of the horizon. I lost so much hope during these days. I lost my mother, my father, my children, and my friends. We were all separated. The only thing that kept me going was the small chance that I would see them all again.
The border between the two halves of Berlin, however, was not completely closed. There were multiple checkpoints that visitors could go to East Berlin, always needing a visa to cross. Most East Berliners were prohibited into crossing into the West, and in order to visit they had to individually apply, but approval was never guaranteed. The East had their own currency called the East German marks, but they were worth very little there. If they were allowed to travel, they could only take a very small amount of the East German marks to exchange for the Western Dutch marks, making trips to the West not financially worthwhile. One of the most famous checkpoints was known as Checkpoint Charlie. First set up in August of 1961, only foreigners and diplomats were allowed to pass through. It was also a site of many daring escapes from East Berliners.
Meine Freundin war in der Nacht vor unserem Fluchtplan sehr nervös. Ich musste immer wieder versichern, dass alles in Ordnung sein würde und dass es
My
sich
girlfriend was very
lohnen würde,
nervous the
wenn wir
night
nach
before our plan to
West-Berlin
escape.
kommen.
I kept having to assure that everything would be alright and that it would be worth it when we get to West Berlin. I rented an Austin Haley convertible and lowered the windshield. I drove down to Checkpoint Charlie, had my girlfriend and her mother duck in the back, and I stepped in the pedal and steered straight into a better life for my family. When we made it under the rail and got into West Berlin, we were overcome with immense joy and hope. We had just received a second chance on life.
Political tides and core ideals in East Germany began to shift during the end of the 1980s. Many Germans began to openly criticize the wall. In 1987, Ronald Reagan delivered his famous speech on the 750th anniversary of the city of Berlin. During the speech, he said the line,
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Things, however, remained mostly the same until 2 years later, in 1989, when civil unrest in East Germany put pressure on the government to loosen its regulations for travel. On November 9, 1989, the East German spokesman delivered the news that that night, all Germans were allowed to cross the wall. Millions of Berliners gathered at the wall with beer and champagne to celebrate the fall of the wall. They brought hammers, chisels, and other tools, and took it upon themselves to tear down the wall with their own hands.
The night of November 9th, 1989, was a night of great hope for the future of Germany. The citizens of Germany, no longer defined by dividing barriers, were able to associate with their fellow citizens. It became one of the greatest street parties in the days to come, as the spirits of freedom, inclusion, and hope failed to diminish. The fall of the Berlin Wall was the first step towards total German unification.
On October 3, 1990, almost 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Germany was finally reunited and they were able to identify as Germans as a whole. To this day, the Great Division of the Berlin Wall remains one of the most chilling and powerful memories of the Cold War, and the collapse of the Berlin Wall was the single greatest defining moment of hope known to mankind.